This week, the horror movie syllabus is looking at porn. Now, calm down. Button your pants back up. Not that kind of porn. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below. It'll give you a sense of what the horror movie syllabus is all about, but in short, we take a look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. Today, the subgenre we're looking at is torture porn, and just the name alone of this subgenre is controversial and edgy and eye-catching and kind of gives it that salacious feel that I think is by design, even though historically the term was meant to be pejorative, and we'll dig into that. But essentially, what torture porn winds up being is the evolution of the slasher film or the splatter film, which in and of itself are kind of synonymous. Arguably, we've talked about that in the past. But basically, torture porn is just reveling in the gore and violence that you would see in a typical, say, slasher movie. So the focus is less on the kills or the victims or even the killer and more on the prolonged gore and violence. And I acknowledge that it's kind of splitting hairs here, but this is where the porn aspect of the torture porn aspect comes in, because if you're familiar with Justice Potter Stewart, when he was talking about pornography, the Supreme Court Justice, and he said, "I know it when I see it," that's kind of how I feel about torture porn. I know it when I see it. It's not that different, objectively speaking, when you talk about it from, say, a splatter film. They're both very gory. They both revel in the kills, revel in the creativity of the kills. But the torture porn feels a little bit more bleak, a little bit more, I don't know, nihilistic or just depraved. It really kind of seems to revel in that violence. Whereas the splatter, I think, is kind of more having fun with it. Torture porn is not really having fun with the violence, generally speaking. It's kind of just stewing in it. And I think that is where the pejorative aspect of torture porn comes from. The term came from a critic who was reviewing a movie that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. And they used the term to mean something, pejorative, something obscene and dirty. And the indication or the implication was that the violence in the movie and the gore in the movie was meant to titillate or stimulate, and that was the only purpose of the movie. The story was secondary, the characters were secondary, and what was front and center were the gore and violence, the money shots, if you will. So it's an apt naming that kind of got adopted by the industry in terms of trying to revel in this shocking aspect of the gore, shocking, taboo, envelope pushing violence that were in these movies. And it really was envelope pushing for the time period. Now, the torture porn subgenre tends to be thought of as something that happens in the early to mid 2000s and kind of carries on for the next decade or so. But I would argue, and I'm not alone in this, that you've seen aspects of this or precursors of this even earlier than that. The movies that get credited often as the granddaddies of torture porn, the patient zero, if you will, are oftentimes ignoring the movies that came before that they are emulating or owe a debt of gratitude to. And like so many other subgenres, torture porn movies can be categorized as other subgenres. There's a lot of crossover or ability to swap these out and put these into other subgenres. In fact, I know some of you have already mentioned some of the movies that we're talking about today in other videos in the comments as selections you made for those videos or those subgenres. So I know that there's some versatility to these movies because, again, it's really kind of like an evolution of slasher, splatter, kidnapping. There's a lot of other overlapping subgenres to this subgenre. For me, I mostly picked movies that were just kind of notoriously known as torture porn movies, even though I would argue sometimes maybe that label isn't super fitting for the movie in particular, and we'll get into that as we go on. When it comes to torture porn, and I probably should have started out by saying this, it's not pornography, it's not while there might be some sex in the movies or nudity in the movies, it's not pornography as you would typically think of it. It is, again, the idea that the torture in the movie is supposed to be titillating or enjoyable the way the sex in a pornographic film would be. So for those of you who are very unfamiliar with this, there's a little bit of clarification that, again, I should have started with before going into this diatribe. But I guess I'm kind of eager to get into these movies because it's a fascinating subgenre, and it's one that I wouldn't say is my favorite, but I do tend to like these movies. Like most of the movies we're talking about today, I actually like quite a bit. But I recognize that their value may be debatable at best. I am somebody who likes gore, who likes the gag effects, who likes the interesting effects, special effects, things like that, Tom Savini type stuff. I love that stuff, especially practical stuff. But I also like a narrative, and that's where oftentimes torture porn tends to be a little shaky. We're going to talk about movies that I think get the formula pretty right and movies that I think are indicative of where the formula goes very, very wrong. So we're really covering a smorgasbord of torture porn today. So buckle up because it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride. And as usual, we're going to categorize these. And in this case, I think we're going to categorize them in the order of how extreme they get, because that's one of the trademark calling cards of torture porn, is that they tend to be fairly extreme movies. Whether or not that's warranted, something we can get into, but the fact of the matter is these movies can be a little extreme, especially for people who don't really like gore. For those of you that don't, this might be a bit of a tough one for you, but hang in there. I think we're going to be okay, fingers crossed. So with that, let's get right into it. Let's tie these movies down and see what makes them squeal. The first movie that we're talking about today, the undergraduate level selection, is The Collector. The Collector came out in 2009 and is kind of the prototypical torture porn movie. It has all of the tropes that would become kind of earmarks or hallmarks for the subgenre, and really doesn't do anything tremendously interesting. But it's interesting to look at it to see where it works, where it doesn't work, and to see how a movie that I would argue not super really torture porn begat the torture porn subgenre craze of the 2000s. But we'll get into all of this in just a minute. If you're not familiar with it, the movie is about a handyman guy who works for a wealthy family, but he's got some money problems that are pretty dire. So he decides to rob their house while they're out. Only when he gets in there, they're not out. They've been taken hostage by somebody known as the Collector, who is doing horrible torture things to them and has set elaborate traps throughout the house. And our protagonist is going to try to maybe help or save the day, but at a minimum, at least try to escape this torture chamber house. But I will stop there in case you haven't seen it and you want to check it out. I don't want to spoil it, of course. But The Collector is a pretty fun movie if you like the torture porn subgenre, if you like especially the trope in torture porn where elaborate traps are set up. This is something that got popularized by the Saw series, and spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about that in just a little bit. But it's very clear that The Collector is just doing that formula. It's really got Saw envy, if you will, because it's got a bit of a similar aesthetic, and it definitely has a similar concept with these very elaborate traps that wind up killing people in very horrible, horrifying ways, which again is something that became kind of a staple for the torture porn subgenre, again, thanks to Saw. Now, when you dig into The Collector, it becomes a lot more interesting to figure out why this is the case, because it's not exactly just a Saw derivative. It was meant to originally be a prequel to the Saw series. It was the original script was called something called like The Midnight Man, and the idea was it was a prequel to the characters from Saw, an origin story, if you will. And then I guess the producers or director decided to can that idea. They didn't really go for it and wanted to make it its own thing, which maybe is the right way to go, because, and we'll talk about it more when we talk about Saw, but I like the idea that it makes it its own thing because they had a neat concept here with The Collector that unfortunately doesn't go anywhere. And that's one of my problems with this movie and sometimes the torture porn subgenre in general, is that the concept might be set up, but then the execution, or really more likely the payoff narratively, isn't there. Because again, the focus is on the torture, it's on the traps, it's on the kills, and there's not really a very satisfying resolution to the setup of, why this person is doing what they're doing. And that's a bummer for somebody like me who likes narrative. And that is where The Collector falls a little bit short. Now, that said, I do think the movie overall is having a good time. The setup is fun. The idea of somebody breaking into a house only to come across something really, really terrible is a fun one. And I like that. And I also like that your protagonist is not necessarily a good person, but you're still rooting for them because of the situation they find themselves in, which is another thing that is a less familiar but tends to be pretty true trope to the torture porn subgenre. Oftentimes, your protagonists ain't great people, but because they're in such harrowing situations, you're still rooting for them. And I think The Collector definitely nails that as well. Some of the traps that are set up are pretty fun as well, but again, narratively, you really have to suspend your disbelief in this movie in particular, and in these torture porn movies in general. The amount of money and time and ingenuity that would go into setting up these very elaborate traps is laughable. There's really no way that that could be done, and so you kind of really have to set that aside, and kind of check your logic at the door when you watch these movies. And The Collector is definitely one of them. For somebody to break into a house, take a family hostage, and set up all of these amazingly elaborate traps and then have them, work out is implausible, to say the least. But if you're thinking that, then you're not having a good time. And I do think that The Collector does a good enough job of making sure you're having a good time to avoid you dwelling on these plot holes and these inconsistencies. The movie's having fun, and while it is reveling in its kills and its traps, it's not doing it so much so, and it's not doing it so bleakly that it's a drag. And so I have a good time with this. So this one leans a little closer to slasher slash splatter than to like hardcore torture porn, which again we're gonna get into some of that. But I like that blend. I like where it's riding that line. So overall, I do like this movie. It's not a great movie, but I like it quite a bit. It did have a sequel, so it was popular enough to get a sequel called The Collection. And I thought that was kind of fun. I actually think that one might be more fun. That one might lean a little bit more towards, funner hijinks, a little bit more creative kills, a little bit more fun. But I'm splitting hairs there. They're both pretty okay movies. They're pretty decent, good times. But if you don't like gore, if you don't like those kind of kills, they're not going to be for you. And if you do, I think you'll have a good time. If you really into torture porn, if you like the really hardcore stuff, this one might feel leave you a little wanting. You might feel a little, disappointed in it. So, it really kind of threads the needle in that sense, but I do think it's worth your time if you enjoy slasher movies. I don't think this is one that's going to put you off too much. So if you were curious about torture porn but really kind of uncomfortable with the harder stuff, this is probably a good one to get your feet wet on. So The Collector, if you haven't seen it, I've told you what it's about, so check it out and let me know what you think if you are so inclined. The next movie that we're talking about, the graduate level selection, is Saw. Saw came out in 2004 and is often considered to be the movie that kind of kickstarted this, 2000s torture porn popularity. And we can discuss whether or not that is an accurate or fair thing to say, but it is kind of the common belief. But it is a movie that I think is maybe unfairly labeled as torture porn, but we are definitely going to get into that in just a moment. Now, if you haven't seen the movie, it starts out with two men chained up in a bathroom, a gross bathroom, and they are being told that one of them has to kill the other one in a certain amount of time, or his family will be harmed. And the two men are trying to sort out why this is being done to them and who is behind all of it. And we see via flashback the clues to this mystery while they try to sort it out and try to figure out how they can escape. And they've been presented with an option, which is to potentially saw off their own feet to escape their chains. And we'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie for you, because this is one that if you haven't seen, you probably should see. It's maybe arguably necessary for your horror education just because it's so well known and so popular. And again, seems to be credited with kickstarting the torture porn subgenre. But in essence, you should see it because it's a good movie. It's directed by James Wan. It's his, I think, feature film directing debut. It's written by Lee Winnell, his frequent writing partner. Lee Winnell even stars in the movie as one of the chained up men. And it's a really good, well-made movie for a low-budget movie. It's a taut thriller. and it's got the torture devices and it's got some of the gore in there, but it really will surprise you in just how not gory it actually is. When you hear the word torture porn, you get a certain idea in your head that Saw probably doesn't really live up to. There is the famous bear trap device that rips your head open. That's probably the most memorable thing in the movie. And there are a few other noteworthy gory things in the movie as well. But there's not nearly as much shocking gore as you think it is. And this movie is spending a lot of time focusing on a mystery that is fairly compelling and good. And so I would quibble that this movie might not technically actually be torture porn, uh, but its sequels are. And I think that's where the torture porn, crown gets put on Saw, is that that bear trap head device was really noteworthy and it got a lot of attention. And I think that the filmmakers really zeroed in on that. That's what people resonated with. That's what they really liked. So the series really focused on that in creating more and more elaborate traps, more and more gory things. That's really the path that it went down. But it never lost the mystery aspect of it. It just got more convoluted. See, Saw has a somewhat complex but mostly okay mystery that winds up being fairly satisfying in my opinion. I like it. I like the twist ending, if you will, and I really like that the story resolves in a way that I thought was unexpected. But even the first movie is a little bit convoluted. There's some stuff in there that just doesn't quite make sense. There's, some motifs. There's, these acolytes and there's this little puppet doll. All this stuff that there's a lot of iconography to this movie that's kind of just shoved into it that doesn't really make much sense. And then honestly, the series doesn't really explain it super duper well. But what the series does do is create more and more elaborate traps, but it retains the narrative. So the movies are, from a continuity standpoint, pretty solid. They're really following the story along. They're not ignoring things or changing things out or throwing things out or rebooting or anything like that. It is one story all the way through. It just gets really messy because, as I was saying, when it comes to the collector, you really have to suspend your disbelief. In order for the killer in this movie, Jigsaw, and you've probably heard the name Jigsaw in connection with Saw, in order for Jigsaw to be doing what he's doing in this series, he had to have massive forethought, in along with a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of manpower to set up all of this stuff so far in advance. It's really, really hard to believe, but who cares? Because it's fun. I do enjoy the series. I don't have the same affection for it that other people do. I don't think that it's as awesome as other people do, but I do have a good time with it, mostly because of that continuity, mostly because of how ludicrous it gets. Because as you watch the movie, it gets dumber and dumber in terms of suspension of disbelief. Like, you really have to just kind of give it mulligans right and left to make to actually accept what's going on. And it goes on so long that at some point it goes from being dumb and annoying to dumb and hilariously fun. So like, it just kind of comes full circle and becomes enjoyable again as the series goes on, because it's so convoluted, so ridiculous, so implausible that you just can't help but have a good time with it. And so it wins you over again after it starts to lose you. It loses you about, midway through the series, and then kind of brings you back in towards the end. And they're still making these movies. So, I'm here for it. It's a good time. But I don't want to oversell it. The original movie was based on a short that Lee Winnell and James Wan did. And you can kind of tell, like, this movie makes probably more sense as a short. That said, when they expanded it out to a full-length movie, it did pretty well. Like, the mystery that they added to it, the backstory and stuff like that worked pretty well. I really liked this first movie quite a bit. When they started stretching it onto 7, 8, 9 films, whatever it is, there's not really enough story to support all that, but they make a valiant effort, and for that, I'm very impressed with that. I think that's a charming, fun, interesting thing for them to do. I do like the actors in there. There's a lot of recognizable names: Carrie Elwes, Shawnee Smith, who actually recognizable mostly for this movie, Danny Glover, Donnie Wahlberg. The series has a lot of recognizable names. Nobody huge, but fun, faces to see. It's a fun series. But as it goes on, more and more gruesome, more and more depraved, and it loses a little bit of the original message. This idea that the reason why Jigsaw is doing this to people is to teach them a lesson where they've done something wrong in the past, and if they are willing to make a sacrifice, they would survive. That's a neat idea, and somewhere along the line, it loses that a bit. They kind of try to explain a little bit, but it does kind of stray away from that a little bit, and as a result, becomes more and more torture porny as it goes on. You know, the original movie is more like mystery and has a message and has a concept, and then that they get farther and farther away from that. So I can see why people look back on Saw and say that's where the torture porn, subgenre starts. But again, not ignoring the fact that other movies did it before then, it's not really the original, not really a torture porn movie. It's not really fair to call it that. But the series did popularize torture porn, so I get that. Now, I'm guessing most of you have seen Saw, so if you have thoughts, leave them in the comments below. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Are you ambivalent to it? But if for some reason you haven't seen Saw, or if you've seen some of the later ones and not the original, check out the original. I think you'll be surprised at the fact that it's a pretty good movie that just has some torture in it, rather than the torture porn fest that the reputation would have you believe. And the last movie that we're looking at today, the postgraduate level selection, is Hostel. Hostel came out in 2005 and really is, to me, the movie that probably kickstarted the torture porn subgenre and really popularized it. I think this is the one that more legitimately should be called like the grandfather of the torture porn craze. This one is far more depraved and reveling in gore than Saw was, and I think it really makes sense that this is the one that legitimately deserves the torture porn label. If you haven't seen it before, Hostel is the story of a couple of American tourists that go to Eastern Europe, looking for a good time, looking to party and have sex and basically be a little debauched, and then they wind up getting kidnapped by this shady organization who sells them to the highest bidder to be tortured to death for fun. And then, of course, can they escape? Can they figure out a way to elude their captors and get away? And we'll just leave it at that without getting too into the hijinks, so as to not spoil things for people who haven't seen the movie, because Hostel is a ride that you should probably just experience. Honestly, it's a movie that I kind of feel like the less you know about it, maybe the better. The movie was made by writer-director Eli Roth, who is a somewhat polarizing horror figure. A lot of people really love him. A lot of people really hate him. I think I like him. I've seen not all of his movies, but I've seen lots of his movies, and I've liked them all okay. I don't think he's an amazing director. I do think he has a passion for horror, but I also think he's way more into himself than anybody else is, and so that kind of detracts from his appeal a little bit. But just looking at his movies as a whole, for the most part, I think I enjoy them, but they are reveling in the gore and stuff, and have less subtlety, less nuance, less to say. But I think that Hostel was the one that probably most had something interesting going for it. The movie is, kind of a standard slasher that just goes to an extreme. You've got these people in a foreign country, they're kind of isolated, and then they start getting picked off and captured. But where it gets interesting for me is in two ways. One is the fact that your protagonist, like I mentioned with the collector, is very much a not likable person that you wind up rooting for simply because of the harrowing circumstances that he's in. But also, I really liked the setup of this organization that is kidnapping people to be tortured. That's interesting to me. It reminded me a little bit of, or didn't at the time, but it does now, reminds me of John Wick, and how there's that, this world of assassins, this whole other world that we're not privy to, and they have their own culture and everything. That's what the world that Roth sets up in Hostel feels like. It just doesn't get enough exploration in the movie to be satisfying, but more on that in a little bit. The movie itself is pretty rough, pretty gruesome. The eye scene, the eye blowtorch scene in particular, really stuck with me. I saw this movie. I was kind of excited to see it when it came out because it was getting a lot of crazy buzz. And I was sitting there in the theater by myself watching that eye blowtorch scene, and just absolutely horrified. It, on the same level of like Zombie 2, the eye scene in there, just really disturbing. And there's a lot of other disturbing stuff in the movie as well. Really dark, really gruesome, really bleak. And again, like the organization doing this, the motivations behind the torture is fascinating and depressing and The commentary behind it is interesting. The social commentary behind it is interesting stuff that they really only scrape up against. Unfortunately, they don't really delve into it. So it's a little bit of a missed opportunity, but overall, I still think it works really, really well. Now, what's funny to me about this movie is that I was going to watch this with my sister and my nephew, who was young at the time, maybe early teens, probably not the movie for him to be watching. And I kind of said, there's a tremendous amount of violence. It's really disturbing. And then she's like, yeah, whatever. He sees that all the time. No big deal. But then we put it on, and like the first act of the movie is a tremendous amount of nudity and sexual situations, like a lot. And I just flat out forgot about that. And she was very upset. Like, why did you not tell me about this? Like, he shouldn't be watching this, and we had to turn it off, because I didn't think about it. I flat out forgot about all of that stuff because the later gore and torture and violence is so disturbing that you forget about the beginning of the movie and you forget about like the sex and the character development such as it is. It is all what sticks with you is like the eye scene and the ankle scene. There's such gruesome stuff in there that's what's going to be your takeaway. That's what you're going to remember. That's what's going to stick with you. But I think the reason it sticks with you is because of that setup, because of the idea of this organization and what they're doing and what it means and what people would be willing to do. I think it's fascinating. I think it's really interesting and disturbing and feels very real, very plausible. It's the world's most dangerous game, basically. It's not the most original of concept, but it's presented in what feels like a fresh and original way. So I recognize I might be a little bit higher on this movie than most people, but I did really like it because I felt that while I was reveling in this gore and really just fetishizing it, if you will, it was also trying to create a really dark, interesting universe that, again, it just didn't scrape deep enough. You've got Takashi Miike doing his famous cameo appearance here, saying you could spend all your money in there. It's my favorite part of the movie. And is Miike playing himself there? Who is he? What is that about? They don't tell you. And I guess maybe that mystery works really, really well because they do explore that world and that organization a little bit more in the sequels because the movie was popular enough to have sequels. Now the second one is not bad. It stars Lauren German from Lucifer, and it's pretty good. It gives you more background on the organization, which I liked quite a bit. And then, it's got a lot of the same beats, but it's got a little bit of a twinge to it, a little bit of a flip to it. So I thought that worked out pretty well. The second one I don't like it as much as the first one because it's not as shocking as the first one, but I did like it quite a bit. The third one, though, is pretty forgettable. I honestly don't even remember much about it. But they're really trying to explore that world more. But at that point, I feel like, they've gone from not saying enough about it to saying maybe too much about it, or there's not much left to say about it. It's not as deep or as rich as, say, the John Wick universe. So it's a little bit disappointing, that third one. But the first one is a trip. Again, the less you know about it, the better. But you do have to know that it's depraved. It's got a lot of gore, a lot of disturbing stuff in there that is really gonna stick with you. It's gonna haunt you if you're sensitive to that stuff. Call it a day. Don't watch it. But if you're into this or you have a strong enough constitution for it and you haven't seen it, I would definitely say check it out because I do think it's one of the better examples of the torture porn subgenre. In fact, if I recall correctly, this is the movie that the torture porn label came from. Somebody was reviewing it and called this one torture porn, even though it came out after Saw. And it kind of concedes to Saw the crown of torture porn because of the Saw series is much more impactful than the Hostel series, but this movie by itself is pretty impactful. So if you haven't seen it and you're up for it, give it a chance because I do think it packs a punch, a really solid one at that. So that's going to do it for our exploration into the torture porn subgenre. But if you haven't had your fill yet, I do have some extra credit movies that you could check out. The first movie I'm going to mention is a movie called Captivity. Now, Captivity came out in 2007 and is not a great movie, but is a great example of a standard stereotypical torture porn movie. It really is basically the kind of movie that people who complain about torture porn are complaining about. And I think with a fairly good reason, to be honest with you. But we'll get into that. If you haven't seen it before, the movie stars Alicia Cuthbert as an aspiring model or up-and-coming model who gets kidnapped and tortured by this sadistic, unseen man who is basically tormenting her and some other captive nearby. And there's a little bit of a mystery as to what exactly is going on, But in reality, the movie's story doesn't seem to be as important as the torture that is being inflicted, which is, again, par for the course with torture porn. But we'll stop there so as to not ruin all the hijinks. Suffice to say, what Captivity has going for it is the torture porn. You know, it's the torture scenes, reveling in that torture, reveling in Alicia Cuthbert getting tortured, cute model getting horrible things done to her. That's really what the movie is about. And as a result, it feels pretty flat. Now, what's weird is I do kind of like this movie, even though narratively it's pretty dumb. It's kind of forgettable. But I do like Alicia Cuthbert. I find her charming. I find her pretty. She is, a good choice for this kind of movie. She's not a great actress, and as a result, the movie falls a little flat. It maybe on repeat viewings becomes more of a so bad it's good. Not quite, but kind of teeters that territory because of her performance and because of the ridiculousness of the movie. Again, like all these torture porn movies, this guy has got some severely wonderful finances and way too much time on his hands to set all this stuff up. Wonderful amount of space. You know, it's kind of ridiculous, and you really have to suspend your disbelief. Uh, but the thing that makes this movie interesting, and the reason why we're talking about it, is not because Professor Victor just kind of thinks it's kind of fun, but because of the pedigree. It was directed by Academy Award-winning director Roland Yaffe. It's written by Larry Cohen, who we've talked about before as, a famous writer-director of horror movies who tends to be a lot more fun than this movie. So it's weird. It's weird that these two guys made this movie. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And when I do a little bit of research on it, it sounds like they were coming up with something that was maybe a little bit more psychological, and then either they or the studio felt like they needed to have more gore in it because that was the trend. That was the hot thing. Torture porn was hot. It hadn't been replaced by remakes yet. You know, in the mid to late 2000s, people wanted the torture porn, so they decided to try to give the people what they want, and it totally backfired. Whatever interesting angle they had got so obscured by the torture that nobody cared. You know, it just wasn't that interesting to anybody. And as a result, this appealed to nobody, and except for maybe me. But even I don't love the movie. I enjoyed the movie when I saw it and then kind of forgot about it, revisited it for this video. I was like, you know what? There's some stuff here that's interesting, but what's really interesting is more the backstory and how it's really just a time capsule, perfect emulation of what torture porn was at this time. If you want your standard torture porn, if you want to know exactly what the standard torture porn is, this is the movie to watch. I would argue that the people who complain about torture porn have no idea because the torture in this movie is tame compared to something like, say, Hostel. But for the average normie, if you will, this is probably a pretty gruesome movie. So I feel like this is just it's an interesting thing to talk about or noteworthy thing to talk about because it so perfectly encapsulates the torture porn subgenre. But it's not a particularly good movie. I'm not exactly, recommending it to you. I'm talking about it here for extra credit for the reasons I just mentioned. But if you are so inclined to see it, this is another one that maybe is a good entry into torture porn if you're kind of curious about it, but you're a little nervous. This is probably a pretty accessible one. It's got Alicia Cuthbert, who was famous from 24 and Happy Endings. I like her in both of those very much. Daniel Gillies from the originals. Did I like the originals? Yeah, you're right. I like the originals because I like vampires and I have the TV taste of a 14-year-old girl. So yeah, the actors that I like in it. So yeah, do I think this is an accessible one? I do. So check it out if you are so inclined. But if you've seen it and you remember it, let us know in the comments what you thought. The second extra credit movie I'm going to talk about is a movie called House on the Edge of the Park. And House on the Edge of the Park came out in 1980, way earlier than the torture porn craze. So this is one that we're going to have to kind of make a case for here. But I want to bring it up because it's kind of interesting that it does have this similar reveling in the torture of somebody, but is definitely a different feel than everything else that we're talking about on this list. But I'll explain. If you haven't seen it, the movie stars David Hess from Last House on the Left as a guy who is a criminal who likes to hurt women in particular, and he and his buddy get themselves invited to a socialite party, a party full of upper class people. They go in there, they're out of place, and then they take the party hostage and then start inflicting emotional, psychological, and more importantly, physical torture on the party goers as the evening goes on. Only perhaps the tables can be turned on these villains, but we don't want to get into it too much because we don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it, as the hijinks start to abound in that movie, and of course the hijinks do definitely abound. Now, I mentioned David Hess is the person who stars in this movie, and he was in Last House on the Left. It's noteworthy because this is clearly a Last House on the Left knockoff. It's trying to be Last House on the Left. It's trying to capitalize on the popularity of that movie. And by putting David Hess in essentially the same role, it's being very obvious about it. It's wearing its intentions on its sleeve. Now, it's directed by Ruggero Deodato, who did Cannibal Holocaust. You know how much I don't love that movie. This one is much less offensive to me, even though it is arguably very offensive. But no animals are getting killed, so I'm okay, I guess, for whatever that means. But the movie has a very similar plot and similar theme to Last House on the Left in both terms of the violence, the torture, and the revenge motif that goes on in there. Again, I don't want to spoil the movie too much, but very, very similar plot, very, very similar theme. Where the movie is interesting to me is in the reveling of the torture. Now, this movie is not as gory as something like a Hostel or a Saw or something like that. It really, by those standards, is kind of tame in what's shown on screen in terms of blood and gore. Where it really comes into play is the psychological aspect of the torture. And in that sense, it kind of reminds me a little bit more of something like Funny Games, where people are being tormented at this party and being forced to do things they don't want to do. But we're still talking about things like sexual assault and bloody violence, physical violence on people. People are getting cut, people are getting injured, people are getting killed. There's a lot less death and gore than you would expect based on that, based on what, me putting it here in the torture porn subgenre. But I kind of wanted to put it in here because I think it's a good example of how movies way before Saw, way before Hostel, were doing the same kind of thing, where they were really focused more on the torture, on the depravity of the situation, rather than on the characters, rather than on the story. There is the story here. The story is Last House on the Left, basically, but it's not compelling, and none of the characters are really well fleshed out. There's not really a whole lot of arc to them. They're tropes, if you will. What really is memorable, what is really focused on, what is really like lingered on in a kind of torture porn fashion is the violence in the movie, both the psychological violence and the actual physical violence. The movie itself probably made a little bit better than Last House on the Left, to be honest with you. At least it's a little bit more even. It doesn't have the same tonal inconsistencies. It's not trying to shoehorn comedy into there, but it's still not a pleasant watch. It's not one that I'm really recommending to you. I do like David Hess a lot. I think he's really good, and I think he's good here. He's got a certain watchability to him that I just like. But overall, I can't really recommend the movie to you. It's a tough watch. Like I said, it's got some heavy stuff in there, some trigger warning type stuff in there, compared to some of the more heavy stuff like the stuff we talked about in our revenge video. Probably not as intense as that, but still pretty intense. So it's not for everybody. But if you've seen it, let us know what you think in the comments below, because I actually think it's a good movie, but I also think it's exploitative, and it's torture porn. It's just way ahead of its time in that regard. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And the last extra credit movie I'm going to mention is a movie called Grotesque. Now, Grotesque came out in 2009 and is a Japanese torture porn movie. And it really is leaning again into that torture porn pretty heavily. It's really a solid, good example of the torture porn subgenre, of all those tropes and all those motifs. And it's not exactly the easiest watch or the most fun of watches, but it's definitely something that's noteworthy and notorious, so we should talk about it. Now, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about this couple that is on their first day, and they get kidnapped by this doctor who proceeds to tie them up and torture them in front of each other, and trying to get them to do things in order to try to save each other. And meanwhile, he's just reveling in doing really graphic, grotesque things, hence the name. And it is a real gory and taboo and demented movie. And so we'll stop there, A, to not spoil it for anybody, and B, because there's not really a whole lot more I can say without being too inappropriate, The movie is gruesome. It's got some very, very specific gory and sexual violence, regular violence. It's demented. It really is. But it also is kind of ludicrous. It doesn't know what its tone is. Like, sometimes it's trying to be hostile, and sometimes it's trying to be like Tokyo Gore Police. And I kind of wish it had really leaned to the Tokyo Gore Police. Like, the ending of this movie is bug nuts crazy. I kind of love the ending of the movie. It goes really nuts. And I wish that the whole movie had kind of been like that. But unfortunately, a lot of the movie is taking itself really seriously, and it shouldn't be, or at least it's failing at doing so. Like, they'll tell the story of this couple in flashback, and it's kind of hysterical because it's like the most awkward first date you'll ever see on film. But that doesn't really feel like it's intentional. It's not really played up. It really winds up being, it feels like bad filmmaking, honestly. And there's no charm to anybody. You're not really interested or invested in any of these characters. And that's, I think, a mistake. Like, it really wants you to sympathize with the victims, but you kind of don't care about them. They feel kind of like caricatures. So I feel like it would have been smarter to lean into the caricature aspect of it and just go really insane crazy, like body horror crazy with this. But it doesn't do that. And as a result, it kind of feels like it comes up short. I'll be honest with you, this movie felt like a little bit of a slog to me. I was kind of excited to see it because it gets listed on a lot of lists as really taboo and really shocking and really intense. And it is those things. But I just didn't connect with the characters or the story or anything going on. So it just felt like, torturing people for torturing people's sake, which is torture porn. That is exactly what the critics came up with the phrase torture porn to describe. And so this is indicative of that. But it had an opportunity to be so much more. When you see the ending of this movie, you'll see what it could have been. It could have been a blast. And it's unfortunate that it's not. It's unfortunate that it didn't just go all in with that ridiculous, goofy tone, because this movie would have been like a brain dead, like Dead Alive kind of Evil Dead style, zany, gory, fun movie that would be excellent. Instead, it's just torture porn. It's not great. So again, I'm not really recommending this except for like the really strong stomach, the real tough ones. Those of you that like the tough stuff, that like the gory stuff, that like to challenge yourself, this one might be for you, and you might enjoy this more than I did. Maybe you don't care about the story being so flimsy and the characters being so bland as I did. Let me know in the comments if you've seen it or if you do check it out. Let me know if you think I'm being a little too hard on it, and if you think there's more merit to it than I do. But this one really wasn't that much for me, but it's so notorious and well known. And for those of you who are really trepidatious about the torture porn, nah, not for you. Not this one. So enter at your own risk when it comes to Grotesque. It is what it is. So that's going to do it for our exploration into the torture porn subgenre. As I've just said, this is not one that's for everybody. It's an acquired taste. It's a special person who likes this kind of stuff. But I do think some of these movies have a lot more merit than they've been given credit for. And as we discussed, I think that some of them are better made and have more to say, and some of them really don't have anything to say, and hence the torture porn motif or moniker, if you will. So it's a controversial subgenre. It's one that's really popular, but that popularity has kind of died out by now as we've moved on to other things, but can always make a comeback because, like I said, torture is an aspect of horror movies, has been around for a long time. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. But this subgenre, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. Are you for it? Are you into it? Are you afraid of it? Let us know. Let's continue this conversation down below. But now it's that time where we look at a Trivia Pursuit horror card, and I try to answer it on camera to see if I really know my horror stuff. Today, we're going to go with the gore and disturbing category on the card because, torture porn. So here's our question. Which of the following is not a monster in the underground bestiary in 2012's The Cabin in the Woods? Zombie, ninja, unicorn, or merman? Now, what's funny about this is that they gave you multiple choice. And I guess for the number of monsters that are in that movie, you kind of have to make that a multiple choice because it covers so many monsters. We've talked about Cabin in the Woods already. I love that movie. I think it's a really wonderful genre-bending, twist of a movie that is really clever and fun. I really enjoy it. I have very strong positive opinions for that movie. And one of the things I love about it is just how many monsters they managed to work into the movie. Now, I knew this right off the bat. It's very, very easy. Although if you've never seen the movie, honestly, those are 4 odd choices. Zombie, ninja, unicorn, or merman. If you've never seen this and you have no idea, Like, that's an interesting thing to try to figure out. Like, which of those sounds like it doesn't belong? Well, there's a couple that sound like they don't belong, frankly. I'd say 3 out of the 4 are not obvious choices for a horror movie. And you know, if you haven't seen it, you'd be thinking that same thing, I think. I think there's one that you know is probably pretty obviously going to be in there. But the other 3, and you could go any way on that. Now, I am talking a bit to give you guys a chance to think about it if you haven't already got the answer. But again, this is one that I feel like if you've seen it, you know it fairly easily because the 3 that are on this card are all pretty memorable. And the one that's not in there, obviously, is not in there. But if you haven't seen this, then you're maybe mulling it over, you think about it, time to start wrapping it up because, you know, you've got a 1 in 4 shot of giving it right, 25% chance. And I'm about to give my answer. So let's go ahead and just get into this. Now, I'd say the one that by process of elimination you should be able to assume is not the correct answer is zombies, because zombies is the one that would be most likely in a horror movie. So it's one of the other 3, right? And obviously, I'm going to just give the answer. The answer is unfortunately ninjas. There are no ninjas in Cabin in the Woods, and we confirm. Yes, there are no ninjas in Cabin in the Woods, and I wish there was, because that's the only way you can make Cabin in the Woods better would be to add ninjas to it. There is the unicorn in there, and it's fantastic. And of course, the merman is a really funny bit that's kind of mentioned early in the movie and pays off pretty well. So if you've seen the movie, you know this. And if you haven't seen the movie, it's been spoiled for you a little bit. But trust me, check that movie out anyways. It's a wild ride. And if you've seen a lot of horror movies, you're more inclined or more, you're going to get more out of it if you've seen more horror movies. So if you're new to horror, maybe watch a few things off the syllabus before you watch Cabin in the Woods. You'll get more out of it. So that's going to be it for today's video. Thank you guys very much for hanging out. I really appreciate you guys. Leave some comments down below. Give me some suggestions of your torture porn favorites, and we'll talk about those. But until next week, class dismissed.